I'm here today to deny the argument made by Jenny that prisons have a negative effect on education society. I assume that these negative effects that she's talking about are the recent school budget cuts that we've been experiencing due to her evidence and her final conclusion. She advocated that educational funding has been severely cut back from using large amounts of money on prisons, that prisoner benefits causes the number of inmates to go up, and that inmates keep on returning to jail. And by the end of this speech, I hope to convince you that these claims not only have no effect, but that a couple of them are completely irrelevant. First of all, prisons have little to no responsibility for the educational budget cuts. While it is true that prison spending has increased and educational spending has decreased in recent years, it is foolish to assume that the prisons are the cause for these cuts. It's not like the government chose to cut school funding to fund the prisons. Our declining educational pedigree could very well be from the school budget cuts, but those budget cuts are not the fault of the rising prison population. Rather, it is the past recession's fault. The Center for Budget and Policy Priorities states that the states made these cuts because revenues from income taxes, sales taxes, and other revenue sources used to pay for these services declined due to the recession. With the recession's effects still present in the current unemployment crisis, state revenue from these taxes have drastically declined. If people don't have jobs, then they don't earn the money or pay the income tax. If they don't have the money, then they don't buy items or pay the sales tax. Without the tax money, legislature has to adapt to meet the available budget or raise taxes in order to acquire it. Legislature has to divvy up the budget in the most economical and diplomatic way possible, and may have to sacrifice money from areas like schools to go to an area where there's a need, a need such as prisons. Prisons are a necessity. They house dangerous criminals and keep the streets safer. In addition, some states, such as California, have predetermined limits for education and thus are less affected by the budget cuts. The fact that schools across the nation have experienced budget cuts is an issue, but it's not an issue that can be related to or caused by prisons. Another negative effect stated was the claim that prisoner benefits causes the inmate population to increase. These prisoner benefits are necessities of life that are not cause enough to make anybody desire prison. The benefits mentioned in Janie's claim of fact speech were medical services, provision of meals, clothing, canteens, health care, and education. These benefits are no more than simple necessities of human life. Inmates are people too. They still need to eat, they still need to drink, and they still need to be clothed. And the education that some prisons offer help keep petty offenders off from coming back in jail again. Recently, prisons if an inmate gets sick or hurt, medical services and healthcare take care of it. Recently, prisons are struggling to confront the hepatitis C crisis. MSNBC reports that around 40% of the 2.2 million people in jail and prison are infected, and that eventually, when they are released, medical experts predict that they will be a crushing burden on the healthcare system, perhaps killing as many people as AIDS in the years to come. And at the same time, these people are carriers likely to spread the disease. Now, hepatitis C is treatable, but testing for it and curing it is expensive, which is why most prisons do not do it, because they already have the budget cut. They already have the set budget and expenses. The healthcare benefits provided by prisons are minimal. They provide no reason to willingly go to jail. The fact that one man robbed a bank for a single dollar to reap these benefits does not mean people are flocking to jail to get them. It just shows that man's crazy. These prisoner benefits are basic human necessities that are merely means to keep the prisoners alive. They should not be criticized as being a root for educational budget cuts. Finally, the claim that prisoners keep returning to prison because they cannot find a job is completely irrelevant to the main argument. While this claim has some truth to it, it nonetheless has no effect on the school budget cuts. The claim is nothing more than a strawman argument. Prisoners can't find jobs, well, because no one can find jobs. If people without criminal records aren't getting hired, then people with criminal records sure won't. However, I still fail to see the negative effects that this has on education. The budget cuts that schools that schools around the nation are facing is most certainly an issue that the government needs to address further. However, we cannot use a rising prison population as a scapegoat to this matter. Prisons are a necessity society and one that cannot be overlooked. And while there may be flaws with the penal system, they benefit society nonetheless and do not harm them.
And all the claims are labeled, and basically you've got a causality challenge that you're dealing with through most of the argument. I think you could come to grips a little bit more with the evidence that the advocate used on some of their points, but you do a good job in kind of analyzing the cause-effect relationship and diminishing the impact of the prisons on the school system. In California, for instance, I do like the fact that you mentioned that there are predetermined limits on spending on this particular cases, and that the amount of people in prisons has less effect on it here in California than like you said, the total budget that is available, whether it is due to tax revenues or other kinds of spending. You also put it in an appropriate context, suggesting that it's a necessity. I think you minimize some of the arguments about the so-called benefits of being in prison. I'm not sure that that was a very strong argument at all to begin with, and you in essence suggest that there are significant issues attached to it. The hepatitis C argument comes up and suggests that it's pretty important, but on the other hand, we're not doing anything about it, so why all of a sudden are prisons a greater necessity if we're not addressing that issue? I think that kind of gets you off of the track. I thought you had a pretty reasonable response to the one case of the person who stole $1 so they could get into prison for health care, and said that that's just an unusual event. It has very little to do with the notion that prisons are appealing to somebody. And the third point you mostly dismiss on the straightforward line about the jobs being unavailable to anybody. Again, I think that the challenge on the link between prisons and education is the key part of the argument, and you did a good, solid job on that. All right, thank you.